Welcome to the Hockey Writers Sabres Scoop, a weekly show with our top Buffalo Sabres writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the Sabres. So get a pen and paper and turn up the volume. You're about to get the Sabres Scoop. Sabres Scoop.
Welcome to Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers, a once-a-week show covering all things Buffalo Sabres and NHL hockey. We thank you for joining us today, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, be sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube and catch the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com. You can also find us on Twitter at SabresScoopTHW and everything else at The Hockey Writer. Our guest today is a pretty big one. You might have seen him on The Athletic. You might have seen him on NHL.com. You've definitely seen him on his Substack, Noted Hockey. It's Joe Yerdon. Joe, how are you feeling today after a huge day in Buffalo?
I think I finally relaxed a little bit. It's a day that I think it's a day we've all been kind of counting on happening at some point. It was kind of a bummer that it was like a first thing in the morning kind of thing where it's like you wake up and it's like, boom, he's traded. Like, all right, let's go. Time to get to it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So fans, I'm sure you know what Joe is alluding to, but just a little bit of a refresher. It finally happened. After months of what has been a really stressful news cycle, it's lasted pretty much the entire lifespan of this very show. Jack Eichel has finally been traded from the Buffalo Sabres. Kevin Adams and company sent Eichel out west to the Vegas Golden Knights along with a 2023 third-round pick in exchange for Peyton, Krebs, Alex Tuch, a first-round pick in the 22 draft, and a 2023 third-round pick. So a couple of questions for you both, and we'll go to Joe first on this. You mentioned early in the morning, what was your gut reaction the moment you saw it and the moment you saw the return?
The gut reaction on the deal was I looked at it as the Sabres got the guy they wanted the most from Vegas with Krebs, because without Krebs, that deal is not happening. On the whole, I looked at it and I wasn't necessarily blown away. I don't know. I guess maybe with all the amount of time we've been waiting, you know, you're expecting to be blown away when I mean, it's a huge trade, but you're expecting maybe to be kind of knocked back a little bit. And I was just kind of like, no, all right. Like it wasn't like the O'Reilly trade where it was just like, oh man, what did they do? Like what happened here? Whereas this one, it's like, okay, all right, I get it. Like everything checks out.
Yeah, I agree with Joe there. I mean, when the report of the Calgary trade came out yesterday, I'm sure that kind of raised the bar a little bit, and maybe fans weren't necessarily as satisfied with this Golden Knights return. But you also got to remember, Peyton Krebs was the best player in the WHL last year. I know he's not off to the best start in the NHL, and he was sent down to the Rochester Americans. Kevin Adams made note of that in his press conference, but he's going to be a key part of this future for the Sabres team. Alex Tuch, too, like this is a really great second line winger. I think he's really going to play well in the Don Granato system. So I think he has a bright future, and you get to upgrade your third to a second and you get that first round pick that you were coveting. I ultimately think it's probably the best that they could have done.
Yeah. And yeah, you know, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the Tkachuk thing really, I think, kind of helped spur this on. I think also the fact that they knew Jack was going to be sitting down with Elliot Friedman at some point today. That, you know, hey, maybe we should get stuff taken care of beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. I know Jack Eichel did the whole media tour today as well. Joe, I got to ask you this, and then I'll send it to Brandon afterwards. How would we grade this trade in general for Kevin Adams? Did he really get the best deal possible, or even the best deal offered to him?
You know, I grade this one okay on its face. It checks the boxes. I you know, expecting that it was going to be 4 first round elements to a trade. It's a big ask. It's a really big ask, and it's a really big hope. But I think the way that this got negotiated down, it makes more sense because, you know, the Sabres are able to get this put this in the past now with Jack. Move ahead, and you got the top prospect you needed to get out of the deal, and you get Alex Tuch, who's a proven quantity, is a really, really good player. and he's from outside Syracuse. So, you get a little bit of regional flavor with it.
Definitely. How about you, Brandon? What would you put a number or grade to it?
I want to give this one something in the B range, so I'll just go right in the middle of that and give it a B. I would echo a lot of the stuff that you guys said. Obviously, Jordan, I know we've talked about every possible trade scenario that could have happened for dozens of episodes here, and you heard some of the names from some of the teams that were mentioned, like Marco Rossi, Matthew Boldy, even Matthew Tkachuk as of yesterday, which was a really exciting one. But I mean, for the team that he does end up going to, the Vegas Golden Knights, like Joe said, they got the number one prospect, and that's what Kevin Adams wanted to walk away with from whatever team that he was trading with, in addition to a really solid player like Alex Tuch, who seems to be excited to eventually put on a Sabres sweater, considering he's familiar with the Western New York area. So I'm impressed in some ways. Like Joe said, not blown away, but I'd give it a B.
Yeah, it's definitely an okay trade. Like you're never going to be able to recoup the assets back that are equal to Jack Eichel's caliber, right? So you have to do the best that you could. I always kind of wanted this scenario to be similar to how the Matt Duchene out of Colorado trade ended up happened, because obviously, looking back on that, the Avalanche completely fleeced the other teams involved, and ultimately it wasn't necessarily like that, different circumstances. But I think the Sabres came out of it the best they probably could at the moment. One thing we also got to be talking about here is the Vegas Golden Knights look like they're ready to let Eichel get the disc replacement surgery that he's wanted all along. A big reason for the rift between him and the team over the past few months, as everybody's, I'm sure, knows that. What do we think of this? Is Vegas going to get the same Jack Eichel when he returns in 3 to 4 months, Joe?
It's going to be really interesting to see. I think given if everything goes right with what he wants with the disc replacement, it certainly seems like it's going to give him a little bit more range of motion, being able to like kind of turn your head more effectively. That's if this works out well, and the recovery time can be shorter. He said, his hope, he's still hoping he can go to the Olympics, like he could be ready to play for the Olympics, which he gets it done to like tomorrow, and then you fast forward 3 months from now, it puts you right at the beginning of February, and that's like what, 2 or 3 weeks before the Olympics are supposed to start. I mean, that's hoping for a lot, but I would never doubt Jack. Jack's he's one of the fittest players I've ever come across in my time covering things. He's just a freak, and he's been a freak since he was like 16 or 17. So he's I would never doubt him. He's going to do his damnedest to do it, but it's going to be really interesting to see, because this is a serious kind of operation.
Yeah, I would definitely continue on that point and just say that, especially watching Eichel sit down with Elliot Friedman today and seeing the things that he said about just his personal viewpoint on the whole medical situation, and saying, hey, look, I've got to live with this for the rest of my life, so I just want to make sure I do something I'm comfortable with and that I believe in. If this does end up having the result that he's looking for, then I've honestly got to be happy for the player. Obviously, Vegas is getting the best player in this trade, hands down. I mean, make no mistake. And if he can play in the Olympics, that would be incredibly impressive. And if he could play, if Vegas is looking like they're going to slide in the postseason despite their disappointing start this year, I think that the Vegas fans are in for a treat. The two other players coming the Sabres way, though, as we move on sort of as to what the Sabres are really receiving here, what kinds of roles do we think, we'll start with Joe on this one, the two player pieces that the Sabres got in return, Krebs and Tuch for now, are going to play in the Sabres' future? Tuch obviously needs some time to recover from an injury of his own, but once he slides into the lineup, he'll be a mainstay in the NHL. And then Krebs is expected, only 13 games of NHL experience right now, but he's expected to make a difference pretty soon. So what roles do we see these guys playing alongside players like Middlestat, Cousins, that young core that we have going on?
I'd say Krebs is going to be really interesting to see how he fits in, because I believe he was taking the same draft as Cousins, if I'm remembering correctly. The fact that you've got two of the top guys that were in that draft, I mean, it was those two and Kirby Dach were like the three of the big ones there as far as centers go. And the fact that they've got two of those guys now is, I don't know, it's nothing will compare to what it was with Jack and Sam. But I mean, Cousins and Krebs is pretty darn good. I mean, I don't know. You can feel really good about having that. But the thing is, you can't pressure him to be the number one now. And just like you can't pressure Cousins to do it. And, Middlestats being kind of, when he comes back, he's going to be kind of thrown into it. But the way they don't have one line that dominates all the ice time. So if you can run a 3-prong attack with that group, it's pretty good. And, adding Tuch just, helps give him a little bit more in the lineup to move around with. But I like Tuch's, the way he plays. He's such an on the forecheck guy. He's a guy that helps like really play up ice, and he's physical. That's kind of how the Sabres have been playing. They've been playing very much high pressure up ice. Tuch in that kind of role is going to look really nice.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there. And I mean, Cousins and Krebs actually have a history playing together. They were on Team Canada at the 2020 World Juniors, playing on a line together, actually. And they had chemistry there in a limited sample size. So who knows, maybe they can recuperate some of that excess at the NHL level potentially someday. But for now, we'll have to wait. Krebs now gets to play on the line with Jack Quinn and JJ Peterka with the Rochester Americans. And I mean, if anyone's not paying attention, Jack Quinn is currently playing at a 50-goal pace there over the course of a full season. So it's going to be kind of crazy to see what inserting a player of Krebs' calendar. And he has 5 assists in 2 games, by the way, at the AHL level this year. So he's already quite great himself. So that's going to be probably the best line in the entire league at that point. And then Tuch, yeah, obviously you're going to have to wait till it seems like January for him to come back from his injury. But there's a lot to like about his game. I mean, he's kind of consistently gotten better. He's locked up long term, which is nice. So this is a player you're going to have for the immediate future. And he isn't exactly in the age range of Cousins in that, but he is slightly older, and I do like that you kind of get a little bit more of an experienced player in your lineup, because that's kind of what the Sabres need, right? The Sabres kind of just needed some NHL bodies in their lineup, and Tuch's not just an NHL body. He's actually he's a good finishing contributor. He really knows how to drive the play. Also, I mean, his defensive components are pretty underrated as well. Even just looking at Jay Fresh's player card, he ranked in the 89th percentile in terms of his even strength defense. His finishing ability is probably something that you would want to see improve eventually, but I really like him as a second line winger. And I mean, under Don Granato's system, I just have a feeling he could maybe even take his game to the next step. And so looking at after the flurry of all the trades that we've seen over the last few months, we've seen Sam Reinhart go, we've seen Rasmus Ristolainen go, and the Eichel trade happening today. At the end of the 2021 season, he had those 3 players. We now have returned that into Peyton, Krebs, Alex Tuch, 2 first-round picks in 2022, Isaac Rosén, Robert Haig, Devin Levi, and a 2nd and 3rd round pick in 2023. How would we rate this total return for those 3 players? I'll start with you, Joe.
It's a lot. It's a lot, and it's yet to be told what it's going to work out, how that works out for them in the future. I think with what happens with Ristolainen in Philly and Reinhart in Florida and Jack being in Vegas now, those results are going to be a little bit more immediate with them. Right now, it seems pretty good that Sam Reinhart's gone to Florida, at the time being, because they look awfully good. But the results, we'll see how this turns out. Right now, I when you break it down the way it is and the way things finished here, and way things are meant to go for a rebuild, what they've picked up seems pretty good, all things considered. They're taking a bit of a lottery ticket with Levi. Had the great World Juniors performance, and maybe he becomes something. Who knows? But having more goalies in the system isn't a bad thing. And but for having Krebs, having Tuch, and the 1st round picks and everything, the picks to come, it's pretty good. It's pretty good work.
Yeah, definitely. And what's your take on it, Brandon?
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add other than that. I really agree with that. I mean, just at face value, it's a lot of pieces in return for just 3 players. And obviously they're not any 3 players. They're 3 very good players, especially Jack. But I mean, that is a good return, and good on Kevin Adams for, making the most out of those trades, especially one that was very impressive was the Ristolainen return. Obviously, that wowed a lot of people, and the fact that they got the 14th overall pick and selected Isaac Rosen with it. He's another young guy who we haven't talked about too much since he was drafted, but That's another young guy to be excited about. So lots of young pieces, and I'd be excited about it. Jordan, you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, looking at just at face value, again, I kind of agree with the points you guys are making. The Sabres have recuperated a lot of assets here, especially that Ristolainen trade. It's pretty crazy to think they still got all of those assets back, and just seeing how he's playing now in Philly. I know some people didn't like the Reinhart trade at the time. There's probably some people that don't like the Eichel trade today. But yeah, I mean, these are still young players. I mean, Robert Hagg's impressed in the Sabres lineup. He's definitely surpassed his expectations 10 games into the season so far. And other guys are just going to kind of have to wait and see, right? Like, you can't necessarily judge them too much today. It's more so tomorrow. So it's going to be interesting. I do like, though, how they've done. I would probably give them a B grade on how they handled all of these situations.
Definitely.
You can't really go harder on the grade anyways, because if you hate it, it's like, well, you might get proven really wrong. If you really love it, then it's like, well, you might get proven really wrong. So B, I think an instant result of any trade, having a B that's okay. That's fine.
Yeah, definitely. And hey, it's been all Eichel today. We're going to get back to some of the Eichel talk from yesterday involving the Calgary Flames rumor, but this one actually probably went under the radar on most people's radars today. But the Sabres actually made another trade. They acquired defenseman Johnny Baychuk from the New York Islanders in exchange for future considerations. Baychuk, who is now 37 years old, sustained an eye injury in March of 2020 and returned to play 3 postseason games with the Isles last season. Now he's going to be placed on IR as soon as he gets back to Buffalo, where he will presumably spend the final year of his contract with a $6 million cap hit. This is kind of interesting. Kevin Adams said this move gives the Sabres more flexibility from a roster perspective in terms of letting young players continue to play a big role in the team. And it keeps them salary cap compliant after moving out Eichel's $10 million salary. So we'll go to Joe first. What are your thoughts on this move in terms of, are the Sabres going to continue to take on more bad contracts in the immediate future and IR players just to stay cap compliant?
I think that's going to be more of a short-term thing right now, because you will have other players that will come along that you have to get signed. There will be guys that you maybe want to give a raise to, different things like that. But they are going to be a budget team. Like that there's no mistaking that. That's how it's going to be for now. If it turns into something where they become like an outpost like it is with the Arizona Coyotes, just, hey, please take on our dead our cap space because we ain't using it, and we would love to have your dead money. That's a role you don't want to get into. But I mean, hey, if it means that you're being as effective as possible with young players on entry level deals, okay, like then you hit the lottery, because that's the perfect way to do it. But the reality is that these guys, you got to play by the rules, and you don't. I can't imagine how Buffalo it would seem to have them get some kind of punishment for not getting to the cap floor. That would be very old style Sabre nonsense.
No, I definitely agree with you there, Joe, because there was the debate circulating today. Will the Sabres be below the cap floor in Middlestead and Jokiharju returned? Everybody's checking cap friendly and figuring it out. So it kind of made sense that you're acquiring an LTI player and Baychuk there. It works out for both sides because the Islanders definitely needed that contract removed from their systems as well. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting that they have a lot of space to work with. I'm kind of in the camp. I would like to see them, if possible, and the price is low enough, go after Dylan Strome out of Chicago, because I kind of think he's not currently their 13th or 14th forward at the moment. He belongs in the National Hockey League lineup. So I think making trades like this kind of allow for those type of situations to occur. And yeah, I mean, it would be quite fascinating to see what happens there. We're going to reset the show here. So you're watching Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, and catch the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com. And you can find us over on Twitter at Sabres Scoop THW. We're heading into our general NHL news here. There were rumors circulating on the Calgary Flames being the other team being in on Eichel. Reports, refuting that came out as well. So ultimately, it came down to Kevin Adams' word today in the press conference. And ultimately, he did refute those claims. He said that reported offer that involved, Matthew Tkachuk and 2 first-round picks. I think Connor Zari's name might have been in there. Ultimately, that wasn't correct. Matthew Tkachuk even spoke to the media today and talked about his name being tossed into Eichel rumors, saying, "I have a hard time believing it was true." What do you think about the situation there? Do you believe Calgary was never in on Eichel to that degree that it had been reported? I want to get your thoughts on that, Joe.
I think it seems very, very possible that Calgary was hinting around at it, because adding him to that lineup, given how well they're playing as well, that would give them quite the ace in the hole and something to be able to counter McDavid in Edmonton with. But as far as Tkachuk being part of that discussion, I don't think that was ever a possibility for a couple of reasons. And, one of them mostly being that Tkachuk's qualifying offer after this season is $9 million. And I can't imagine Terry Pegula being very excited about spending $9 million on a guy he just picked up. But I mean, if you're talking Sean Monahan in that deal and then sweetening up some of the prospect names there, that I would believe.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Jordan, you and I speculated that Calgary was a player in the trade talks just because it made sense, and coming back the other way, like Joe said, Sean Monahan was a logical choice. I mean, he's a center. He's around the same age group. He's had very good seasons, but has kind of hit a slump with Calgary. So it made a lot of sense for Monahan's name to be involved in there. Tkachuk, I was super surprised to see yesterday, and all signs are pointing to that sort of being a fake rumor. So we'll never know how true that is, or maybe we will. But yeah, I mean, that was really interesting to see.
I think a rumor like that is some people had kind of sniffed it out right away when it popped up and said, boy, that'd be something else if that came out. That was meant to kind of be a test, test the wind thing from Kevin Adams telling an old teammate, being like, hey, just, I don't know, maybe I heard this little thing might be out there. You might want to toss it out for me. And but that's conspiracy theory talk anyways, but
yeah, for sure.
It's very possible that whole leak served a very strong purpose.
One point I just kind of want to add to the discussion here, I saw this tweet from Steve Dangle today talking about, how does Calgary go from just being in on Jack Eichel to now doing nothing, right? So obviously, you don't go from being in on a player of Jack Eichel's caliber to really just doing nothing, I imagine. So what do we kind of expect that team to maybe try to do towards the trade deadline? This is a team that's kind of been middling the past few years. They haven't really had an identity until their terrific start this season. I mean, Jacob Markstrom's finally the goalie that was advertised in last year's free agency. Johnny Gaudreau is obviously the storyline there, being in a contract year. He's been terrific so far. Do we think that, they're going to be players on other, trade deadline acquisitions, as the months move on here? I'll start with you, Joe.
I think it's going to be a little bit trickier for Calgary, because when you're taking a swing at Eichel, you're going for the home run. Like you're not just trying to get on base. You're going all the way for that. And that would have been a very impressive line up there. Consider, if you've got Tkachuk, you've got Eichel and Gaudreau. I know they don't normally, like, those two guys don't usually play together on this on a line, but you got to kind of throw that out there just to see how it works, right? Like that's the kind of stuff you get excited about when you hear those rumors. And it's one of those things where it's you understand why it happens, you understand why the names get out there, but it's also like, you feel bad. But for Calgary, I mean, if they're going to be chasing somebody down, you guys mentioned Dylan Strome before. And I mean, if you're looking for a kind of a stopgap help or somebody that can at least give you a little bit better depth, probably couldn't hurt to call Chicago and see what it would take to get him out of there. Bigger fish than that, though. I tend to not believe that's what a team really wants to do at the deadline, especially if if they're chasing it and they're kind of out of the, a little bit out of the playoff race, and you think you can get back into it, or, get into it and stay, then maybe you take a swing at that. But you're taking a big risk in doing that. Although acquiring Eichel is a little different because you get to have him for the next 4 or 5 seasons.
Definitely, yeah. I don't have too much to add, because I would honestly have to think about other players that Calgary could go after. So I'm gonna have to get back to you on that, Jordan. It's a tough one, especially when you lose out on, like Joe said, the home run. But Yeah, so let's move on to a general NHL question because this is actually pretty intriguing. Obviously, we all know that the Sabres are playing way above their expectation level. So let's talk about teams that maybe aren't meeting that expectation that we had for them at the beginning of the season. It's no longer October in the NHL. So what teams should be worrying about their positions in the league standings as we approach the 10 games played mark? Teams like Montreal, Chicago, Ottawa, Seattle, especially Chicago and Montreal, I'd like to point out they're accumulating losses at a very rapid rate. So, Joe, what would you say about those teams in specific, or any other teams that haven't been really playing to their expected level?
It's, I think in some cases their panic is justified. I think in Montreal's case, they've got a really big problem there. I mean, yes, there's no Price, there's no Weber. I get that. But Caulfield struggled. They sent him down. They sent him down to Laval. Jake Allen is a nice goalie. He's had his great turns. He can still string together some really good games. But he's meant to be a backup at this point. And, it's fortunate for Montreal that he's, as good as he is. Because if they were going with somebody that was just kind of there to, give Carey Price a breather every now and again, this would not be sitting very well. But they've got nothing else to really work with there. So they gotta figure it out. And, I think I don't sweat Toronto struggling too much, just because their talent up front is just too good. They're not going to be bad for that long, but they're another team where, if Jack Campbell's great, they could really mix it up, but defense is still a little sketchy. The scoring can be very hot and cold for them, but for them, don't worry about Toronto. Chicago, I mean, they've been a smoking wreck for a couple of seasons now, and it's just been a very slow decline coming back to earth for them. And this is, I mean, everything that they've had this year is just dreadful. So I don't know how you shake off all of that stuff and all of the issues that the problems they have on the ice. And, the seeming, there's some dislike of Jeremy Colleton and what he does there. It's just everything about it is bad vibes in Chicago. So I don't, if they get back into it, they become a playoff team. They pulled some magic strings there.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned the Chicago situation there, because we will kind of provide an update in our next question. But just talking about in terms of this question, Jeremy Colleton was getting booed at the Chicago Blackhawks home opener. That just shows you what the fans think of him. And I don't really see how he lasts in that organization much longer. Lots of players such as Jonathan Toews, quite underperforming. And this was a team that was supposed to take that next step, right? Like Seth Jones, they still have to, his contract, $9.5 million over 8 years, hasn't even started yet. That begins next season. And it's not like he's been necessarily terrible. Obviously it's kind of similar to last season. He's been decent offensively, but his defensive game is very suspect. And I don't really like how he plays there. And then you talk about all the other ads. Marc-Andre Fleury, who you didn't even know if he really wanted to be there because of that trade out of Vegas, has looked terrible to start the season. On my fantasy team, by the way. Not a great look. Not a great.
Sorry to hear that.
And and this is a team that, who's actively playing this bad, not even playing Dylan Strome in the lineup for some reason. It just screams dysfunction at the moment. You have to wonder what they're going to do there. And they're the storyline at the moment. Montreal is obviously the other one. I think sending Cole Caulfield down makes sense. Players can have a decent run over a limited sample size like he did in the playoffs last year. It's kind of surprising that he's been this bad. But, let him develop in Laval, and eventually you'll see him again at the NHL level this season, I have to imagine. And I think losing players like Philip Deneau and Tomas Tatar really hurt them more than people expect. Tomas Tatar played on one of the best 5v5 lines in the NHL over multiple years, playing on the line, I believe, with Brendan Gallagher as well with Deneau. Losing those players meant something to that team. They really embodied, what the Canadians were. And they no longer have that identity with all the players missing. So those are the two teams that I would have a tough time believing they're going to make it back in the playoff race at this moment. So kind of tying into Chicago here, there is an update in the Brad Aldrich situation, as USA Hockey is contacting the parents of the players that he coached dating back to 2005. That's the next step in this. Joe, I kind of just want to get your reaction to seeing this investigation unfold, from the Jenner and Brock report to Cal Beach unveiling himself and everything that's happened since. Kind of just I know it's not necessarily justice to talk about it too short, but what are just your general thoughts on everything that's occurred in the past few weeks?
I'm very proud of Kyle Beach for being able to step out in front and speak about it. He certainly didn't owe that to anybody. It's horrifying what everybody who got past the buck on this in Chicago were allowed this to happen. And the fact that what their inaction helped lead him to go abuse other people is beyond the pale. Like that to me is the worst. It makes a horrible situation that much more awful. And you can't help but have full sympathy for Beach in this case, and the fact that how miserable everything was for him after that happens, from his team, like that kind of stuff is just absolutely blows me away. But the fact that that he's speaking up about it now and bringing that conversation out about how what's proper, can people in charge get their stuff figured out to make sure that these things don't happen and that they don't try to cover them up for 10, 11 years. Like these are all proper conversations to have. And that stuff those conversations are hard and they don't happen often, but they need to happen.
Yeah, it's been a tough conversation for everybody talking about this over the past week or so. Just looking at Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane's response to this, we weren't able to talk about this in the last episode. It's pretty appalling what they're saying, making it about Stan Bowman and the GM staff and not even directly apologizing to Cal Beach, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty inexcusable.
Yeah. And I mean, I think they've learned from that, because I think the last, I think a few days ago, Kane addressed it, after a practice. He stepped right up and was just like, listen, I was saying the wrong thing there. I wasn't being cognizant enough of this. And Taves essentially did the same thing a day or two later. So that they get it, but man, that's part of learning how to address these kinds of situations. Yeah. Where, you think, it's a weird relationship dynamic there with those guys and Bowman. Like, that relationship is completely different than what the rest of this is. But you have to be able to compartmentalize those things and understand that, maybe somebody that you're that close with just couldn't figure out how to pull the trigger on taking care of the situation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said there, Joe. Brandon, just before we get set to end the show here, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's really hard to put it into words. Obviously, you just read and ingest everything and try to learn as much as possible. I will say that one, as morbid as it might be to say in this situation, I think that one positive that has come from it has been the massive outpour of support from players around the league. You look at guys like Wayne Simmons and the things that they're saying, real leaders and veterans around the league who are giving all their support to Kyle. And now hopefully younger players know into the league that there are people out there who are going to look after you and take care of you. And the really important thing is just that if, God forbid, this were to ever happen again, that if you tell somebody, that they're going to take care of you, that they're going to support you and they're going to be there for you. And so I think that's one positive that's come of this. And I've been happy to see that.
And to make sure you're keeping up to date on this story, you should be following Rick Westhead of TSN on Twitter and Katie Strang at The Athletic. Also, the Chicago beat reporters have been doing a pretty incredible job as well. It's guys like Ben Pope. So just make sure, to keep, because there's a lot to digest, right? It's really hard to keep up with everything. Those guys summarize it the best, in my opinion. But overall, it's been a crazy day here in Buffalo. Jack Eichel finally is done. We're 40 episodes into this show. It's kind of weird to think about, this is really the new era. Like, this is officially a new era of Sabres hockey. So It's going to be fascinating to watch, and you have to hope the rebuild this time turns out way better than the last time. But for now, we thank you for joining us, as this has been Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube and follow us on Twitter at SabresScoopTHW. Make sure you head over to morningskate.io, by the way, to sign up for our daily Morning Skate newsletter so you don't miss out on that latest and weirdest hockey news coming at you every day. Thanks again, Joe, for coming on tonight's show. You're always invited back on. You can read his stuff over on his Substack, Noted Hockey, and follow him on Twitter at Joe Yerdon. Don't miss out on all the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com. For Brandon and Joe, this is Jordan, and this has been Sabres Scoop. Until next time.